Nobody survives that kind of fall. A plane splitting in midair, plummeting at high speed into the middle of the forest. No warning sign, no response time. When the rescue teams flew over the area and saw what was left of Flight 375, they knew what to expect. Bodies, wreckage, silence. But in that silence, something broke. In the corner of a clearing forced open between the trees, a figure was crawling, covered in dirt, dried blood, and leaves, her clothes torn and an arm held in a makeshift sling. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't screaming. She just stared at an invisible point between the branches, as if waiting for whatever was out there to come back. Her name was Sarah, and against all odds, she was alive. It took 17 hours to find her, and the strangest part wasn't finding her. It was what she said. Her eyes were open, but distant. When the paramedics asked her name, she answered in a low voice as if finishing a dream. "I shouldn't have gotten on. He saw me." Sarah Clark was 26, an award-winning architect, a career on the rise, an impeccable presence at every presentation she gave. In a leather briefcase, she carried the blueprints for a new cultural center to be built in Denver. She was practical, cold, some colleagues might say. She preferred numbers over emotions and well-laid plans over surprises. That night, she boarded Sierra Pacific Flight 375 at 10:47 p.m. The destination was clear: Denver. The mission: present the proposal that would define the next year of her life. She chose seat 12A, window. She always preferred to watch the city shrink below, a silent reminder that the world kept moving even when everything else felt still. The plane was far from full. 42 passengers, 5 crew members. People returning home, others on business, some with the weary look of longing in their eyes. But Sarah wasn't tired. She was restless. She couldn't say exactly why, but ever since check-in, she'd felt a dull unease at the back of her neck. That strange sensation like when someone is watching you even when no one is there. She tried to ignore it, told herself it was just the stress from the presentation, but as the plane taxied down the runway and the engines gained power, something inside her resisted. It was only when they were in the air, crossing through dense clouds, that Sarah felt the problem wasn't the stress or the turbulence. It was on that flight, that night, and maybe with something that wasn't supposed to be there. The flight continued calmly. Clear sky, no turbulence. Just the low hum of the engines and the occasional clink of cutlery against plastic cups. Most passengers were asleep or engrossed in rerun movies on the small screens. Sarah, ever the productive one, was reviewing her slides for the 5th time. She ran her finger over the arrows on the trackpad with precise movements, taking small sips of tea. Chamomile with 2 drops of lemon. The only gentle habit she maintained amidst her controlled routine. The flight attendant walked by with a smile, asked if everything was all right, and commented lightly, "Get ready for the heat in Denver. Today's forecast is 100 degrees, like a sauna in the sky." Sarah replied with a restrained, polite smile. She didn't care for small talk, but she acknowledged the kindness. She went back to her slides. She was almost satisfied with the presentation. This proposal was the high point of her year, maybe her career. Through the window, a sea of clouds stretched to the horizon, tinted with shades of orange and dark blue. It was a beautiful, calm image. Inside, the atmosphere was tranquil. A soft air conditioner, buckled seatbelts, everything as it should be. Until the lights started to flicker. First, quick white flashes, as if someone had accidentally fiddled with the control panel. Then, a brief power dip. The reading lights went out for half a second, long enough to create a murmur among the few who were awake. Sarah looked up, frowning. She glanced around. The flight attendants exchanged looks, trying to mask their tension with automatic smiles. One of them quickened her pace toward the cockpit. The other picked up the internal phone and whispered something Sarah couldn't hear. It was only a second. But in that second, the comfortable silence took on a new weight. Something was out of place. At 11:14 p.m., the world turned upside down. Without any warning beyond a muffled metallic click, The aircraft lost altitude abruptly. The overhead compartments rattled, and a meal tray crashed to the floor, scattering ice cubes and silverware across the aisle. The seatbelt chime sounded shrilly, like a mechanical scream piercing the forced calm of the cabin. Sarah dug her hands into the armrest. She stared straight ahead, but her gaze trembled along with her body. To her right, a gentleman let out a muffled cry. Further back, the sharp wail of a child could be heard. The plane shook violently, as if something were rattling it from the outside in. The captain's voice came over the speaker, muffled and trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor partial electrical failure. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We assure you that everything is under control." But the voice wasn't convincing, not even to himself. And Sarah knew it. She had flown dozens of times. She knew what turbulence felt like. This was different. It was as if the plane wasn't just falling. It was being pulled. As if something outside were scratching the fuselage. Yes, that was the word that came to her mind. Scratching. First, a subtle sound, like a fingernail on fabric. Then stronger. Metallic. Scraping. Scratching, as if fingers or claws were running along the outside of her window. She turned her head slowly against her own will, and she would have sworn she saw something. Not a bird, not a piece of metal. Something long and black disappearing behind the wing. For an instant, she thought she was having a breakdown. Stress, exhaustion, low blood pressure. It could have been anything, but at that very moment, 2 rows back, someone screamed, "There's something out there!" And then the plane plunged again. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with dry snaps, like invisible hammers shattering reality. In a matter of seconds, the cabin descended into chaos. Screams, instinctive reactions, parents trying to put masks on their children. A man tried to pray, but the words came out in sobs. The plane was diving, and gravity left everyone at the mercy of the invisible force that was pulling them down, or toward something beyond. Sarah yanked at her mask, but it seemed stuck. Beside her, the woman who had been sleeping was now flailing, her eyes wide as she tried to breathe in the void. The lights flickered again, trembling, desperate. The ceiling cracked loudly. The baggage compartment ahead of them burst open. A suitcase hit someone with a dull thud. In the midst of it all, Sarah didn't scream. She simply stopped. She felt a strange heat, as if her body were burning from the inside out. And then, silence. Absolute. As if someone had switched off the world. Nothing else existed, just a white light. Bright. Incomprehensible. And then, total darkness. She didn't know how much time had passed. But when her eyes opened again, sound returned like a deathly whisper. The rustling of leaves, a dry snap, shallow gasping breaths, her own. She was lying on her side, on hard ground. There was tall grass around her and broken branches like makeshift spears pointing at the sky. The air was heavy, dense, almost unreal. Her forehead throbbed. Blood trickled from her eyebrow to the corner of her mouth. She looked around, not understanding. She was in a clearing, alone. Not a single piece of the fuselage. No screams. No sound of sirens, of propellers, of fire. Just her. And the forest. Sarah tried to stand, but a sharp pain shot through her left arm like an invisible knife. She groaned. Her knees trembled. Her chest burned with every breath. She screamed, "Anybody? Is anybody there?" But only the sound of the wind answered. All around, the scene was a nightmare frozen in real time. Remnants of the plane were scattered among broken trees, like toys destroyed by a cruel child. Twisted seats, open suitcases, oxygen masks hanging like ghosts. And bodies, some whole, others not so much. She tried not to look directly, but her eyes wouldn't obey. A man was trapped between 2 seats, his arm outstretched as if still asking for help. Further on, a flight attendant lay face down, her uniform stained, her name badge still pinned to her chest. Nothing made sense. There was no smell of fire, No sign of an explosion, no trail of smoke in the sky. It was as if the plane had disassembled in midair and fallen with unreal precision. And then, the detail that made Sarah's stomach turn. The cockpit was gone. The front section of the fuselage where the cockpit was simply wasn't there. No wreckage, no anything, as if it had never existed. Sarah felt the world spin. She was alive. Only her. Alone, injured, her arm swelling, her body trembling, and the air growing heavier by the second. Everything around her said this wasn't just an accident, it was something else, and she still had no idea what was yet to come. The pain in her arm was unbearable, but adrenaline kept Sarah on her feet. With ragged breaths, she took off her own blouse and with some effort, fashioned a tight makeshift sling. The cloth, dirty with soil and blood, served to hold her arm in place, but it didn't ease the constant throbbing. She walked, one step at a time. The forest seemed to close in around her. Tall trees muffled the light from the sky, and the sound of insects mixed with the soft whistle of the wind through the branches. Along the way, she saw open suitcases and pieces of clothing hanging like silent flags of the disaster. It was then that she found a shattered suitcase resting between two exposed roots. Inside it, among socks and damp documents, was a small first aid kit, red, scratched, but intact. Sarah gave a silent thank you. She cleaned her forehead with gauze, secured the cut with medical tape, and swallowed 2 painkillers, hoping they would help. She kept walking. The woods were dense, damp. Every step required effort. Her body ached, and her mind struggled to piece together what had happened. She tried to remember the exact sequence, the feeling of falling, the panic, the white light, and then a blurry memory, something that made no sense, something her mind seemed to be avoiding, a shape. Yes, she had seen something, not on the ground but in the air during the fall. For a split second, between a child's scream and the final jolt, she had the impression of seeing something outside the window. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't another plane. It was a shadow, with a form, as if something had been watching the plane as it fell. Sarah stopped. Her eyes widened. The memory was clear now. It wasn't a delusion. She saw it, and it wasn't human. Time ceased to make sense. By the 3rd day, Sarah no longer knew if it was morning or afternoon. The sky, when visible, always seemed gray. The clouds dragged by slowly like a heavy sheet covering the world. She measured the hours by her own heartbeat and the rumbling of her stomach. The water was running out. A canteen she had found on the 2nd day, inside a bag attached to a crushed seat. As for food, there was none. Only leaves, roots, and the hope that they weren't poisonous. Her body was weakening. Her mind, even more so. Sarah started to confuse reality with dreams. One moment, she would hear her mother calling her name. The next, she swore she saw a flight attendant among the trees, standing with her back to her, motionless. Late in the afternoon of the 3rd day, staggering through the thick vegetation, she tripped. She fell face first into the damp earth, her hands sinking into the mud. When she tried to get up, she saw something ahead, something that shouldn't have been there. Beneath roots and thick vines, partially covered by soil and moss, was a structure. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't wreckage. It was ancient, made of greenish stone and carved with low-relief symbols that didn't resemble any known language. It looked more excavated than built, as if it had been born from the ground, and the world was only now rediscovering it. Sarah approached, dragging her feet. She reached out her hand. She touched the surface. It was pulsing, not like a machine, not like electricity, like a heart. Sarah recoiled, breathless. The stone felt warm, alive, and in that instant, as the sound of birds suddenly ceased all around, she had an unsettling certainty. This thing knew she was there. Sarah stood motionless for a few seconds, her eyes fixed on the narrow entrance, shrouded in shadows and hanging moss. That's when she heard it. At first, almost imperceptible. Voices. Dragging whispers so low they could have been just the wind playing in the leaves. But it wasn't the wind. The voices spoke in a strange language, full of guttural sounds and long pauses, yet somehow, those words seemed to echo inside her, as if resonating with the memory of something she had never learned but still recognized. Her heart raced. The voice of reason screamed at her to get away, to run far from that place. But another voice, deeper, more insistent, told her to go inside. Sarah felt an almost magnetic pull. The entrance to the structure was a dark hole, a fissure in the stone that opened like a silent mouth waiting to swallow anything that dared to approach. She hesitated. Fear bubbled up like poison, and the chill down her spine threatened to make her retreat. But the part of her that fought to survive, the part that still wanted to live against all odds, made the decision. Slowly, Sarah went inside. Each step took her deeper into a shadowy unknown, where the silence was heavier than the darkness. And as her eyes tried to adjust to the lack of light, the voices grew clearer, closer. And Sarah understood that the real test, the one that would decide her fate, was just beginning. Sarah entered slowly. The air inside the structure was dense, heavy, almost suffocating. The walls were covered in symbols she had never seen before, strange designs, as if they spoke a forgotten language. In the center of the chamber, a figure carved in stone dominated the room. It was an ancient sculpture, a face with eyes so realistically carved they seemed alive, watching her every move. On the floor, near the base of the sculpture, something caught her attention. An old diary, its cover worn by time. Her surprise grew when she realized the diary was written in English, and the date on the cover was 1923, almost a century ago. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the diary. The first sentence she read seemed to speak directly to her like a message hidden in time. "If you have made it this far, you are not alone." Those words echoed in her head like a whisper, bringing both hope and fear at the same time. Sarah knew this was a decisive moment. What came next could be the key to her survival, or the absolute end. Sarah ran out of the structure, her heart racing, her mind in a blur. She didn't know if any of it was real or if she was losing her sanity after so many days alone in the forest. Her body ached. She was malnourished, feverish, and nearly out of strength, but her will to live was stronger than any exhaustion. Shortly after, a search party finally found her. The rescuers supported her, offering water and first aid, relieved to find her alive after she had been missing for so long. Sarah tried to explain everything. She spoke of the hidden temple, the shape she sensed during the fall, the diary with its mysterious words. But the men just looked at each other, disbelieving. According to them, there was nothing, no structure, no sign of that strange place where Sarah said she had been. The heavy silence that fell between them was broken only by the sound of the wind in the trees. Sarah realized that her story sounded unbelievable, almost impossible to accept. But for her it was real, and the doubt that lingered in the rescuers' minds was just the beginning of a mystery that no one could explain. Weeks later, Sarah returned to Chicago. Her body had healed, but something inside her had changed forever, a silent shadow that no one could see. She avoided talking about what she had lived through, as if she were afraid of waking something that was meant to stay buried. Then, a week after she got back, Sarah received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside, there was only a single sheet of paper, the second page of the diary she had found in the forest. The words were handwritten, like a warning. "Now that you have seen, it has also seen you." The fear settled in again, along with the certainty that the truth was much deeper and darker than she could ever have imagined. Sarah knew that her fight for survival was far from over, and whatever it was, it had now marked her forever. Sarah survived the impossible. The fall, the forest, the isolation, everything that seemed destined to end her. But what she truly brought back wasn't a visible wound, nor a trauma that heals with time. It was a secret she would carry forever, and a warning. a silent warning that echoed in the words of the diary, in the shadows of that forest, and now, in her own life. Perhaps deep down, it was also a countdown, a tense wait for what was still to come. And Sarah knew that despite everything, her story was far from over. If you enjoyed this incredible story of survival and mystery, go ahead and hit that like button below to help the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next tales we'll be bringing you, always full of suspense and facts that seem all too real. Also, comment what you thought and where you're watching from. I want to know who's on this journey with me. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.